Hi there, my name is GilKeidar and I wrote the soundtrack for the video game Wrath of Zeus.
Wrath of Zeus is a 3v1 asymmetric maze escape game in which 3 players delve into a labyrinth in search of a magical orb. They must find and bring this orb to the exit of the maze in order to win. Meanwhile, the 4th player takes the role of Zeus, who overlooks the maze and who tries to do everything he can to stop the players by placing traps, cutting the torchlights, and of course, throwing his signature lightning bolts. I was part of a 7-person team that developed Wrath of Zeus in 10 weeks as part of the course CSE 125 at the University of California, San Diego. The goal of the course was to give us real-world experience by having us build, from scratch, a large software system. To make things fun, that system was a 3D LAN multiplayer game. As the game began to take shape, I had the opportunity to both work on the game and to write the music for it. And I was super excited to do this since I've never written video game music before, and the idea of playing a video game and hearing my music in it was, well, music to my ears. Bad puns aside, I wanted to give an overview of how I approached writing the game's soundtrack. Firstly, I wanted to experiment with using leitmotifs. A leitmotif is a short musical theme that is attached to some entity, which can be a person, place, object, mood, etc. To attach the leitmotif to its entity in the listener's minds, it is played whenever its entity is introduced to the audience. Then, whenever the leitmotif is played later on, the audience knows that its entity is being referenced. If you're familiar with the concept of a pointer from C programming, leitmotifs almost work like pointers. Playing the leitmotif in a sense dereferences the pointer to bring you the entity at which the pointer was pointing. Unlike pointers, however, leitmotifs have an extra useful feature. Being musical themes, they can be altered in many different ways while still being recognizable to the listeners as the original theme. This is powerful, as then you can play the leitmotif in different ways to evoke different forms of the entity. For example, let's say we had a leitmotif that is attached to a hero. Playing that leitmotif really slowly and in minor key might suggest the hero's defeat, while playing the leitmotif loudly and in major key might suggest the hero's triumph. You could even play multiple leitmotifs together in counterpoint, or perhaps in call and response to suggest that 2 heroes or entities are working together, or that they are fighting one another. You can see the potential here for how, using leitmotifs, music can tell a story alongside visuals and dialogue, which is why this technique is widely used in movies and in video games. If you've seen The Lord of the Rings, for instance, the famous Shire theme and Rohan theme are examples of leitmotifs, as are the Imperial March and Force themes from Star Wars. I found leitmotifs to be useful for another reason. They gave me building blocks that I could use as starting points to write tracks for different parts of the game. For instance, instead of starting from scratch with a player's maze exploration theme, I knew that I wanted to evoke the excitement of starting to explore a new dungeon filled with traps and enemies, so I used the dungeon leitmotif as the melody of the track and built on top of that. I composed 6 leitmotifs for Wrath of Zeus, of which I used 5. When I thought about the game, 4 distinct entities came to mind. The heroes, who delve into the maze in search of the orb. Zeus, the powerful dungeon master who casts lightning bolts at the heroes. The dungeon itself, with its massive scale and treacherous paths. And the orb, the magical and mysterious object with which the players can claim victory. The reason I had 6 leitmotifs and not 4 is because I had 2 leitmotifs for the players and 2 for Zeus, as there were different aspects of these entities that I wanted to highlight and build upon with music. Let's quickly go through these leitmotifs. The first leitmotif I composed is the heroic charge leitmotif for the heroes, which is also the shortest leitmotif I wrote. You can see that this is just a classic dun da da dun warrior horn cry. The key specified here is E minor, so the tonic is E and the dominant is B. After playing the tonic 3 times, we jump to the dominant. Since this leitmotif is so short and simple, it's easy to build on top of this and use it in different places with different harmonies. You can hear this leitmotif in the start game theme for the heroes. The next leitmotif for the heroes is the heroic determination leitmotif. It's longer and more melodic, and attempts to evoke the courageous nature and resolve of the players in the face of adversity. You can hear this leitmotif in the victory theme for the heroes. Next, I wrote a leitmotif for the dungeon itself. This leitmotif is a bit more mysterious and tries to open to represent the wonder and scale of the dungeon. As I mentioned earlier, I used this leitmotif in the maze exploration theme for the players. For Zeus, I also wrote two leitmotifs. The first, called the Zeus Wrath leitmotif, I didn't call it Wrath of Zeus, since then it might imply that it's a leitmotif for the entire game, attempts to reflect the angry and powerful nature of Zeus with a long half-note melody. You can hear this leitmotif in the Zeus start game theme. The second leitmotif for Zeus is supposed to represent the sort of maniacal laughter of the Zeus player as they hurl down lightning bolts at the heroes. Hence, this is the lightning bolt / laughter leitmotif. Originally, I was thinking of playing this leitmotif twice as fast with repeated notes to represent the laughter, but kept it as is and added repeated notes later on in the theme instead. The harmony here is a bit more complex, and I had a lot of fun writing this in a more contrapuntal style. You can hear this leitmotif in the Zeus relay race theme. Finally, I wrote a leitmotif for the orb. This leitmotif is essentially a chord progression with the melody being produced by the top notes of the played chords. I'll first play the full version of a leitmotif, and then only the top note melody. The fast harmonic changes are an attempt to simulate the magical nature of the orb, as well as its many details across its surface as it glows. I originally was thinking of a classic fantasy orb that showed passing visions of distant places or times, and I tried to represent that with harmonic movement. Unfortunately, I didn't find a way to put this leitmotif to use in the game, but for completeness I am including it in this video. Okay, so we went through the leitmotifs in Wrath of Zeus. Now let's examine how I used one of them, the heroic charge leitmotif. This leitmotif appears in two places, at the start of a menu theme and in the start game theme for the heroic players. Let's first look at the start game theme for the heroes. I want to give a short disclaimer regarding the sheet music though. You may see a lot of weird articulation or dynamic markings in the score. Mostly, these are there because I was writing the music specifically for MuseScore, as we used MuseScore's generated audio directly in the game. To get the performance of the virtual instruments to sound like I wanted, I sometimes had to give odd articulation or dynamic instructions, and it was sometimes a bit finicky, but the overall sound quality of MuseScore 4's virtual instruments made it worth it. Okay, so let's take a look at the start game theme for the players. This is actually the first theme I wrote for the game, which plays in the player's opening cutscene. In the cutscene, the players walk into the labyrinth, even though Zeus just threw down 3 lightning bolts in front of them. I mean, that takes a lot of guts. I wanted to score this part with a heroic charge leitmotif, as I thought it was exactly the side of the players that was being showcased by the cutscene. And if you look at the score for the player's start game theme, you can see that it's filled with a heroic charge leitmotif and slight variations of it. Let's dissect this a bit more closely. As you can see, this theme is fairly short, being only 3 measures long. It's also almost entirely performed by the brass section, with a single bassoon and the percussion section helping to build the tension. In the first half of the first measure, we have a verbatim statement of a leitmotif by the bassoon, the first trombone, and the tuba, with the exception that the dotted half note at the end of the leitmotif is replaced with a quarter note, making the leitmotif half as long. Then in the second half of the measure, we jump up to play the leitmotif with a C major harmony, which is our major 6th chord in the key of E minor, and the leitmotif is now played by French horns 1 and 3 and the first trombone. In the first half of the second measure, French horns 2 and 4 and the trumpets join in, playing the leitmotif with D major harmony, which is our major 7 in natural minor. You can see that here the role of the notes in the leitmotif is reversed. Instead of playing the bass note of the chord 3 times and then jumping to its 5 note as we did in the first measure with E to B and C to G, we now play the 5 note and jump to the bass note, playing A to D instead of D to A. You can also observe that some of these jumps go up a perfect 4th while others jump down a perfect 5th, and the first trombone goes down a major 3rd as its first note is F sharp, the 3rd note in the D major chord. Up till this point, the harmony changed once every half note, but in the second half of the second measure, we're now changing the harmony every quarter note, i.e. twice as fast. The harmony in this part is a repetition of a C major to D major, or major 6 to major 7, we've seen before, and this faster harmonic change, coupled with a faster rhythm, is essentially an example of rushing to the cadence, i.e. rushing to this resolution back to the E minor chord. You can see that French horns 2 and 4 and the trumpets are playing another variation of the heroic charge leitmotif, as the rhythmic structure is similar, with the quarter note at the end being replaced with 2/8 notes. In this score, the heroic charge leitmotif is used to sound like, well, a heroic charge, but this leitmotif also appears at the start of the menu theme for the game. You can see it right here in the first 4 measures. After that, the heroic determination leitmotif is played. Here, the leitmotif is played in its original length, taking a full measure. Due to the whole note harmony accompaniment played by the lower range brass and the strings, this music feels like it stays in place and creates a solemn atmosphere. Let's dissect this a bit more closely. In the first measure, French horns 1 and 3 play the leitmotif verbatim over an E minor, or minor 1, harmony as we're in the key of E minor. In the next measure, instead of playing the major 6 harmony we heard before in the start game theme by playing C major, we play A minor, the minor 4 harmony or subdominant. Notice also that the interval between the first and last notes in the leitmotif is smaller, reduced to a minor 3rd, and the movement goes down instead of up. French horns 2 and 4 join in, playing the leitmotif lower, starting at the E but not jumping to the bass of the chord, which would be A, instead jumping to C, which is the 3 of the chord. Then we have a break from the monotony in the third measure, as we have one harmony for the first beat, which is the minor 5 chord, or B minor, and then another harmony for the other 3 beats, which is the major 6 chord, C major. This harmony follows the rhythm of the leitmotif. The first harmony plays during the first 3 notes of a leitmotif, and the second harmony plays during the last long note of a leitmotif. Then finally, in the fourth measure, we get to the actual dominant chord, B major. You can also see that we slowly add more instruments. In the third measure, the first trumpet and second trombone join in, as well as the oboes, to create a softer texture, and in the string section we've added the second and first violins. Together, this creates a solemn atmosphere that hints at the immense task before the heroes. I thought of this as sort of the players waiting outside of a dungeon, readying themselves up before they face the dangers of a dungeon and Zeus himself. And there you have it! In this video, we looked at the different leitmotifs I composed for the Wrath of Zeus soundtrack and looked at how one of those leitmotifs, the heroic charge leitmotif, was used in it.